The sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the grand hall, dancing over the marble floors like liquid gold. The guests in their glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos whispered among themselves, laughter mingling with the gentle notes of the orchestra. At the center of it all stood a young maid, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling as she held the hem of her apron. Across from her, a man in a perfectly pressed suit, a millionaire known for his arrogance and charm, lifted a violin with a teasing smirk, his words sharp and mocking. "Play the violin, and I'll marry you." He never expected her to do this. It all began on a rainy Thursday afternoon in London. A soft drizzle danced against the grand windows of the Whitmore estate, home to one of the most powerful women in the city, Eleanor Whitmore, the billionaire heiress of a music empire. Elegant, brilliant, and always in control, Eleanor was the kind of woman who never had a hair out of place. But behind her flawless image was a heart still scarred from loss. The loss of her husband 5 years ago, and the silence that followed him. Music had once filled her mansion. Violins, laughter, love. But after his passing, only echoes remained. That day, she returned from a high-profile charity gala, exhausted and numb from another night of polite smiles and empty compliments. Her luxury car rolled into the driveway of her sprawling estate, but before she could step out, something unexpected caught her attention. Laughter. Pure, genuine laughter. She turned her head, and through the rain-splattered glass, saw 2 figures near the garden fountain. It was the janitor, Thomas, and a little boy, her son, Ethan. They were barefoot, splashing in the garden's water tube, laughing as if they had the whole world in their hands. The sight startled her. Her son hadn't laughed like that in months. Not since the night he'd stopped touching his violin. The same violin that once echoed through the halls, playing duets with his late father. For a moment, Eleanor simply stood there, frozen between 2 worlds. The polished perfection she lived in, and the simple joy she had long forgotten. Later that evening, she found Thomas drying off Ethan in the servants' corridor, both dripping wet and grinning like guilty children. Eleanor's tone was sharp. "Thomas, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The janitor immediately stood up straight. I'm sorry, ma'am. He wanted to see the water tube, I thought." But before he could finish, Ethan tugged on her dress and said softly, "Mom, Mr. Thomas showed me how to make music with water." Eleanor blinked. "Music?" Thomas hesitated. Then, picking up 2 empty glasses, he filled them with different levels of water, and gently tapped them with a spoon. A soft, melodic chime filled the room. "Each one has its own note," Thomas explained shyly. "Just like a violin string." Her son giggled, trying it himself. "It's like playing the violin, Mom." Something inside Eleanor's chest stirred, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Over the next few days, she began noticing small things. Her son would wait for Thomas to finish his cleaning rounds, eager to learn new instruments, made from everyday things, bottles, cans, even broom handles. Eleanor watched quietly, torn between gratitude and discomfort. Why was a janitor teaching her son music? Why did this man, who owned nothing, seem to hold the secret to happiness she had lost? One afternoon, unable to resist curiosity, she followed them to the old music room, the one she hadn't entered since her husband's death. There, she found Thomas gently dusting off her late husband's violin. Her breath caught. "Don't touch that," she said sharply. Thomas froze. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I just thought." Ethan interrupted. "Mom, please," Mr. Thomas said, "if I learned to play one song, Daddy would be proud." The words hit her like a blade. That night, she couldn't sleep. Memories flooded her, her husband teaching Ethan to play, their duets, the way laughter filled every corner of this house. She realized how empty her life had become, filled with board meetings, social events, and noise, but no music. The next morning, she made a decision. She invited Thomas and Ethan to the grand hall. The chandeliers sparkled above as she handed the violin, her husband's violin, to the janitor. Her voice was calm, but her eyes glistened. "Play the violin," she said softly, "and I'll marry you." The room fell silent. Thomas stared, speechless. "Ma'am, you're joking, right?" But Eleanor's face was unreadable. "You said music comes from the heart. Prove it." Thomas hesitated, his hands trembling as he took the violin. The guests, her business associates and household staff, had gathered, whispering in disbelief. He lifted the bow, drew a deep breath, and began to play. It wasn't perfect. His technique was raw. But the sound was pure, soulful, alive. Each note carried something real: gratitude, love, and the unspoken pain of a man who had lived humbly yet felt deeply. Ethan watched with wide eyes, clutching his mother's hand. And then, Eleanor began to cry. Not quiet tears, but years of bottled-up grief pouring out with every note Thomas played. When the final note faded into the air, the hall was silent. She stepped forward, whispering, "That was my husband's favorite song." Thomas lowered the violin. "I didn't know," he said softly. Eleanor smiled through tears. "You played it exactly the way he would have wanted, not perfect, but full of heart." In that moment, she didn't see a janitor. She saw a man who understood what truly mattered: not wealth, not titles, but music that connects souls. She took his hand and said, "Don't worry. I wasn't serious about marriage. But I was serious about this. From today, you'll never clean floors again. You'll teach music here, to every child who can't afford it." Thomas's eyes widened. "Are you sure, ma'am?" She nodded. "Because music healed my son, and it just healed me too." Weeks later, the Whitmore mansion was alive again. Children from nearby schools visited every weekend, learning instruments under Thomas's guidance. Ethan played alongside them, his laughter returning, his spirit reborn. Eleanor often sat by the window, listening, not as a billionaire, not as a widow, but as a mother rediscovering what love sounded like. And as the sun set one evening, Thomas looked up from the piano and said softly, "You know, I never played the violin expecting anything in return." Eleanor smiled. "That's why it meant everything. True music doesn't come from wealth, talent, or fame. It comes from kindness, from connection, from a heart that dares to feel again. Sometimes, the richest people are not the ones who have the most, but the ones who remember how to listen." Violin sparkles.